Jung's insight about addiction wasn't about willpower or moral weakness. It was about spiritual crisis and why you can't heal addiction until you face what he called the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness. Jung documented that addiction represents what he termed spiritus contra spiritum, the psyche's misdirected search for transcendence and connection when healthy spiritual pathways are blocked. Jung's perspective was revolutionary because he found that lasting recovery requires addressing the underlying spiritual void that addiction attempts to fill, not just eliminating the substance. Today, I'll explore Jung's insights about addiction as spiritual crisis, and why he believed recovery requires what he called vital spiritual experience rather than willpower alone. The medical model's missing dimension. Modern treatment centers report relapse rates of 80–90%, yet a small percentage of individuals achieve lasting recovery through what appears to be fundamental personality transformation rather than behavioral modification alone. Jung himself struggled with what his colleagues called excessive introspection. While they criticized his deep psychological explorations as pathological, he recognized these same intense seeking patterns in his patients, minds thirsting for transcendence through whatever means available. His clinical observations revealed something startling. Those struggling with addiction often possessed heightened sensitivity and profound inner life. They weren't morally deficient. They were individuals whose deepest longings had found destructive expression because healthy pathways to fulfillment were blocked or unknown. Jung wrote, "The so-called alcoholic is merely a case of someone whose higher needs have been perverted into an addiction." He discovered that substances provided temporary access to altered states of consciousness that mimicked genuine transcendent experience. The Latin etymology proved illuminating. Spiritus means both alcohol and spirit, the same word for religious experience and intoxicating poison. This wasn't coincidence, but psychological insight into addiction's true nature. When treatment focuses solely on eliminating behaviors without addressing underlying longings, it misses the soul's desperate attempt at self-healing. Jung noted, "The approach to the numinous is the real therapy, and inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experience, you are released from the curse of pathology." Jung's revolutionary insight emerged from his correspondence with Alcoholics Anonymous founders. Those achieving lasting recovery had experienced huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, fundamental shifts in consciousness and meaning-making that transcended simple abstinence. Jung's breakthrough discovery. The psychological establishment of Jung's era demanded scientific explanations that avoided religious or mystical territory. Jung's insistence that the psyche contained transcendent dimensions made him controversial in academic circles. His patients taught him what colleagues couldn't see. These individuals described their substance use in transcendent terms, seeking unity, dissolving boundaries, touching infinity. Where psychiatry saw romantic delusion, Jung recognized authentic longings misdirected. Clinical notes from this period reveal his growing understanding. The patient seeks in the bottle what we seek in church, nature, art, creative work. He seeks transcendent experience, ego dissolution that allows touching something greater. But lacking proper vessel for this experience, it becomes destructive rather than transformative. Jung realized addiction represents misdirected individuation, the psyche's natural drive toward wholeness, expressing itself through chemical means, because healthy pathways remained blocked or unavailable. His documentation showed successful recovery always involved replacing lower transcendent experience with higher connection. This wasn't religious doctrine, but psychological observation. People healed when they discovered genuine meaning. When Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote to Jung in 1961 describing his spiritual awakening that led to sobriety, Jung's response revolutionized addiction understanding. Jung replied, his craving for alcohol was the equivalent, on a low level, of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. How could one formulate such an insight in a language that is not misunderstood in our days? This letter revealed Jung's core insight. Addiction wasn't disease requiring cure, but existential crisis requiring transformation. He explained that the only right and legitimate way to such an experience is that it happens to you in reality, and it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to higher understanding. Jung's breakthrough emerged from validating Wilson's spiritual experience as the force that broke addiction's grip. He realized the ego, conscious, controlling personality, was too limited to overcome compulsion alone. Recovery required connection to the self, deeper transpersonal center connecting individuals to meaning beyond themselves. His letter continued, the helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum, spirit against spirit. This wasn't academic theory, but clinical observation of what actually worked. Jung warned Wilson about purely rational approaches. The approach to the numinous is the real therapy, and inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experience, you are released from the curse of pathology. Even the help of the Almighty seems to need a certain preparation in order to let the individual reach an understanding of the meaning of his affliction. This correspondence became foundation for understanding recovery as consciousness transformation rather than behavior modification. Jung had identified why medical approaches showed limited success. They treated symptoms while ignoring the soul's cry for transcendence. Shadow integration for addiction recovery. Jung's first technique involves what he called shadow integration, consciously recognizing and accepting the rejected aspects of personality that addiction attempts to manage unconsciously. The shadow contains everything about ourselves we've learned to suppress: anger, vulnerability, pain, unmet needs. Jung discovered that addiction often functions as unconscious shadow management, temporarily silencing parts of ourselves we can't consciously bear. Shadow recognition. Identify what emotions or experiences your addictive behavior helps you avoid. Jung taught patients to ask, what am I not willing to feel when I'm sober? Emotional archaeology. Trace these avoided feelings back to their origins. Jung found that addiction often masks childhood wounds, trauma, or developmental arrests that were too overwhelming to process consciously. Conscious dialogue. Instead of medicating these shadow aspects through substances, Jung taught patients to dialogue with them directly through active imagination and journaling. Integration practice. Gradually learning to hold these difficult emotions consciously rather than numbing them, developing what Jung called conscious suffering, the ability to feel pain without being destroyed by it. Jung treated a businessman whose alcoholism masked deep shame about his sensitivity. Through shadow work, they discovered his drinking suppressed what he called his weak emotional nature. As he learned to value rather than reject his sensitivity, his need for alcohol diminished because he no longer needed to escape from himself. Start by identifying your primary avoided emotion when sober. Spend 10 minutes daily writing about this feeling without judgment, asking what it needs or what it's trying to protect. This begins the shadow integration process Jung considered essential for lasting recovery. If you've recognized that your addiction helps you avoid certain feelings, write this in the comments: I'm ready to face what I've been avoiding. Cultivating authentic transcendent connection. Building on shadow integration, Jung's second technique develops genuine transcendent experience to replace addiction's counterfeit version. Where substances provide temporary ego dissolution and artificial unity, authentic practices offer sustainable connection to what Jung called the numinous, experiences of the sacred that transform consciousness without destructive consequences. Transcendent experience. Inventory. Examine your history for moments of genuine connection, meaning, or peace that occurred naturally. Jung emphasized these reveal your authentic transcendent capacity. Ask, when have you felt most connected to something larger than yourself? What activities generate awe, gratitude, or sense of unity? Jung noted these experiences often occurred in nature, through creative expression, meaningful relationships, or service to others. He wrote, "The individual has always been dependent upon experience that could give life meaning." Practice. Cultivation. Develop regular activities that connect you to transpersonal reality. Jung wasn't prescriptive about forms, but emphasized consistency in whatever generates genuine encounter with the sacred. Effective practices share common elements. They quiet ego's chatter, open awareness to larger realities, and generate reverence. Jung documented patients finding authentic connection through meditation, prayer, artistic creation, contemplative time in nature, meaningful work, or transformative reading. The key wasn't specific form, but genuine encounter with what Jung called the transcendent function, bridge between conscious and unconscious, finite and infinite. Community integration. Transcendent experience requires community confirmation and participation. Find others who understand both recovery and authentic development, avoiding purely secular approaches that ignore the sacred or purely religious ones that bypass psychological work. Jung wrote, "The approach to the numinous needs confirmation and participation of others who have walked this path." Seek communities honoring both psychological depth and authentic transcendence. Purpose connection. Link recovery to larger service or contribution. Jung found addiction loses power when individuals discover their unique role in collective healing. He called this finding your myth, discovering the larger story, giving personal struggle universal significance. Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This often meant transforming personal suffering into service, using recovery wisdom to guide others through similar darkness. Jung treated a woman whose prescription drug dependency masked existential emptiness following religious disillusionment. Through exploring her natural transcendent experiences in nature and creativity, she developed personal practice, fulfilling deeper longings without chemical enhancement. She began daily contemplative nature walks, not as exercise, but as communion with what she called the living world. Creative writing connected her to transcendent inspiration, and she gradually developed meditation, honoring her non-traditional path. Jung noted her recovery accelerated when she began mentoring other women in recovery, finding that her journey became more meaningful when shared in service to collective healing. Identify one activity naturally generating connection or transcendence for you. Commit to engaging this practice daily for 15 to 20 minutes, observing how authentic nourishment affects your relationship with addictive impulses. Jung emphasized consistency matters more than duration. Better brief daily practice than extensive weekly sessions. Ego-self axis development. Jung's third technique involves strengthening what he called the ego-self axis, the connection between conscious personality and deeper transpersonal wisdom. Jung discovered that addiction often represents ego inflation or deflation, either grandiose attempts to control everything or complete surrender of personal agency. Recovery requires balanced relationship between ego and self. Ego assessment. Recognize how your addiction relates to ego dynamics. Does it inflate your sense of power and control, or does it deflate you into helpless victimhood? Self-connection. Learn to distinguish between ego desires and self-guidance through meditation, dream work, or contemplative practices that access deeper wisdom. balanced surrender. Develop what Jung called educated surrender, releasing ego control while maintaining personal responsibility and conscious choice. Higher power relationship. Whether conceived religiously or psychologically, cultivate relationship with power greater than ego that can provide guidance and strength beyond personal willpower. Jung treated a gambling addict whose behavior represented ego inflation, attempts to control fate, and prove superiority over chance. Through developing conscious relationship with the self, through dream analysis, the patient learned to channel his need for risk and excitement into creative endeavors that honored both personal agency and humility before larger forces. Begin each day by asking your deeper wisdom, what does my recovery need today? End each day by acknowledging one way you received guidance or support beyond your conscious planning. This develops the ego-self axis Jung considered crucial for sustained recovery. Comment if you've experienced guidance or strength that seemed to come from beyond your personal willpower. I've felt support larger than myself. The unified approach to recovery. Jung's comprehensive approach synthesizes shadow integration, transcendent connection, and ego-self balance into what he called the individuation process, becoming whole rather than merely abstinent. Begin each day connecting with deeper wisdom, practice shadow awareness throughout daily activities, and end with transcendent reflection. Jung emphasized recovery requires consistent inner work, not just behavioral change. Successful recovery often involves what Jung termed enantiodromia, transformation into the opposite. The same psychological energy that drove addiction becomes fuel for development and service to others. Recovery doesn't eliminate the fundamental thirst, but redirects it toward authentic nourishment. Jung observed that individuals sustaining long-term recovery often developed heightened sensitivity, creativity, and capacity for helping others heal. Find others who understand both psychological depth and transcendent development. This might include 12-step groups honoring transcendent dimensions, therapy groups focused on deeper work, or communities acknowledging both human shadow and authentic development. Jung envisioned recovery not as returning to previous functioning, but as achieving greater wholeness than existed before addiction. The crisis becomes catalyst for individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. Jung documented cases where individuals achieving integrated recovery became wounded healers, people whose healing journey equipped them to guide others through similar darkness. Their addiction experience, fully integrated, became their gift to collective healing. The complete transformation. Jung treated a patient who exemplified this integrated approach. Sarah, a healthcare worker, had developed alcohol dependency that masked both childhood trauma and spiritual emptiness. Her ego oscillated between grandiose helping others and complete self-neglect. Sarah's addiction began subtly during nursing school, when she discovered that alcohol helped her manage overwhelming empathy for patients suffering. What started as occasional stress relief gradually became daily necessity as she absorbed trauma from everyone around her without conscious boundaries. When Sarah entered therapy with Jung, she was drinking heavily every night and had begun hiding alcohol at work. She described feeling like an empty vessel that everyone pours their pain into, yet couldn't understand why helping others, her supposed calling, left her so depleted. Through careful exploration, Sarah acknowledged her suppressed anger about early emotional neglect. Her alcoholic father had demanded that she care for his emotions while ignoring her own needs. Rather than drinking to silence this rage, she learned to honor it as appropriate response to real violation. Jung guided her through what he called active imagination sessions, where she dialogued with her inner child, the part that had learned to sacrifice herself for others' approval. This angry child revealed that Sarah's compulsive helping wasn't authentic compassion, but an attempt to earn the love she'd never received. The breakthrough came when Sarah realized her drinking was self-medication for this childhood wound. As she learned to validate her own emotional needs, her compulsive caretaking of others naturally diminished, and with it, her need to numb herself afterward. Simultaneously, she discovered that her calling to help others represented authentic spiritual expression, not just ego compensation, but she needed to distinguish between codependent rescuing and genuine service. She developed a meditation practice that connected her to what Jung called transpersonal love, caring that flowed from fullness rather than seeking validation through professional achievement. Through contemplative prayer and time in nature, Sarah began experiencing what she called being held by something larger than myself. This spiritual connection provided the strength to maintain boundaries at work while still offering genuine care. She no longer needed alcohol to cope because her spiritual practice provided the resilience she'd been seeking through substances. Through ego self-work, she learned to serve others from fullness rather than emptiness, maintaining boundaries while offering genuine care. Her helping became expression of wholeness rather than attempt to heal her own wounds through others. Jung taught her to begin each day by asking her deeper wisdom, how can I serve today without losing myself? This practice helped her distinguish between ego-driven rescuing and self-guided service. Sarah's transformation took 2 years of consistent inner work. She experienced several relapses during the first year, particularly when family crises triggered her old patterns of absorbing others' emotions. But each setback became opportunity for deeper integration as she learned to recognize earlier warning signs. The turning point came during a family emergency when Sarah remained present for her dying mother without drinking or losing herself in caretaking. She later described this as the first time I loved someone without abandoning myself. The result wasn't just sobriety, but transformation into what Jung called an individuated person, someone who serves their authentic nature rather than compulsive patterns. Her former addiction became integrated as sensitivity to others' pain and capacity to hold space for healing without losing herself in the process. Sarah eventually became a mentor for other healthcare workers struggling with addiction, using her integrated understanding to help them distinguish between authentic service and codependent burnout. Her addiction experience, fully processed, became her gift to collective healing. Comment below, I choose spiritual transformation, if you're ready to become the integrated person Jung documented, using your recovery journey as pathway to wholeness. The transformation path. Jung's insight reframes addiction from moral failure to existential crisis, a soul seeking transcendence through the only pathway it knew. Your struggle reveals not weakness, but depth. When you address the underlying thirst through authentic connection, shadow integration, and ego self-balance, recovery becomes possible through consciousness transformation rather than willpower alone. Jung's approach shifts from symptom management to soul healing. Instead of asking, how can we stop the behavior? Jung asks, what is the behavior trying to accomplish, and how can we fulfill that need constructively? This transforms addiction from enemy to teacher, curse to catalyst for becoming who you truly are. Begin this week with Jung's shadow technique. Spend 15 minutes daily identifying what emotion your addiction helps you avoid, then dialogue with that feeling through writing or meditation instead of numbing it. Simultaneously, identify one authentic transcendent practice: meditation, nature time, creative expression, or service to others. Commit to this daily, observing how genuine nourishment affects your relationship with addictive impulses. Seek connections with others who understand that recovery involves becoming more than you were before. Look for communities validating your transcendent sensitivity, while encouraging personal responsibility, honoring your need for meaning while providing practical integration tools. Jung's insights complement, but never replace professional addiction treatment. These approaches work best alongside medical supervision, therapy, and community support programs. If you're currently struggling with active addiction, please seek professional support immediately. Your journey toward wholeness, not despite your struggle, but because of the depth that created both vulnerability and capacity for profound healing, can become your unique contribution to collective healing. The wounded healer emerges not from avoiding darkness, but from transforming it into medicine for others walking similar paths. If you want to explore Jung's concept of individuation and how personal transformation serves collective healing, check out my video on the psychological hero's journey. Comment below. I choose conscious transformation. If you're ready to begin Jung's path from addiction as crisis to addiction as catalyst for becoming your authentic self. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.